In 2026, the formula in Formula 1 will change. What's going to happen is the FIA will hit the reset button and we'll get some all new regulations, designed to improve the show and help bring in some new faces. And we've actually got 2 new faces for 2026. Cadillac has now been officially confirmed because of all the background changes that have happened at Andretti in recent months, with Andretti removed from his position and a reshuffle taking place that will see Andretti enter as Cadillac rather than the famous Andretti name. But I covered all of that at the time. The other new face, well, not exactly a new face, but a returning face, will be Ford, who will be partnering with Red Bull to do the engines from 2026 onwards. And speaking of the engines, the engine formula is going to change. It's not a return to the fabled V10s, and there are some people out there that think that returning to V10s will make for better racing somehow. I don't get it either, but the engines or power units will be simplified slightly to try and make the cars lighter and smaller, so the cars can start taking different lines instead of playing follow the leader. The removal of the MGU-H will be a step in the right direction towards making things smaller and lighter, but the concern that was raised earlier this year is that the cars will start running out of battery and might need to downshift on straights to do some harvesting. And again, I covered all of this when it was being talked about, and it was a genuine concern. Former Red Bull boss Christian Horner, and that's still a bit weird to say, was concerned that the cars were going to be running out of battery midway through the lap, and that would cause problems with delivering power because the engines are going to now be 50-50 between the internal combustion engine and the batteries, as opposed to being the engine supplemented by the battery. It's something like 70-30 in favour of the engine at the minute, but it's going to be 50-50 from next year. And this started a debate on whether the engine should deploy progressively less power the faster they go to try and stop that from happening. But the rumours are Mercedes have worked out how to best deploy the energy and do it as efficiently as possible. But the other thing we've not heard much about beyond headlines is how these 2026 regulations are actually going to work versus what we've got now in 2025. The FIA and the teams and everybody else has only really been posting headlines. They're now going to be this much lighter, they're going to be this much smaller, we're going to do this, and this. Well, yeah, cool, but that doesn't really explain things for us idiots, does it? How different are the 2026 cars going to be versus what we've got now, and is it going to be better than what we've got now? At the start of the current regulation cycle, things were a bit all over the shop. I guess it was the new regulation baby steps that were being made, with the main concern being porpoising, a phenomenon caused by the aerodynamics not working as they should, and something that I never really understood beyond aero magic not really being magic anymore. Some teams, like Ferrari, had low amplitude high frequency porpoising, while Mercedes had high amplitude low frequency porpoising. And while people want to meme on Mercedes for complaining, they weren't the only ones that were doing so. Ricciardo was experiencing back pain from porpoising on his McLaren, while Kevin Magnussen and Carlos Sainz reported nerve pain and other issues from it. Ferrari basically went, well, we're still fast with this porpoising, so we're just going to deal with it. But as time went on, the teams worked out what was what. Porpoising seems to be something locked firmly away back in 2022, and over the last 18 months or so, the field has got progressively closer and closer and closer, to the point where at some tracks, DRS isn't really doing anything, and we're getting these so-called DRS trains. It was reckoned at Suzuka earlier this year that a car would need over a second a lap advantage to use the DRS zone towards turn 1. That's mid-2000s performance deficits. I mean, just look at the 90s for that as well. This is the starting grid for the 1998 Japanese Grand Prix. Schumacher was on pole but had to start from the back of the grid after stalling, and it's no wonder he was able to blitz his way up through the field on the first lap. Most of the cars at the back didn't bother fighting him for that reason. That and he had a championship to win. Aerodynamics seems to be the big issue for modern Formula 1 cars and the dirty air that they produce. And dirty air isn't exactly a 2025 thing or a 2007 thing or a 2014 thing, because Murray Walker was talking about dirty air as early as the 1980s. But the problem is, as the cars have become more and more advanced and the aero has become more and more efficient, the dirtier that air has become. During my race review for the Belgian Grand Prix, I mentioned that these cars have become 200-mile-an-hour pressure washers, although somebody did say that they're closer to airbrushes than pressure washers. But airbrushes don't make cleaning destructive, so I'll continue using pressure washers as the comparison. Air rushing through those tunnels under the cars and being accelerated before being shot out the back is going to cause dirty air, but when water is brought into the mix as well, that's going to get fired out the back too. Which is why those spray guards that they were talking about a few years ago never caught on. Because of all the water being fired out of the diffuser, those spray guards are just useless, really. So it seems that Formula 1 has taken all this on board and been looking to the new regulations for a solution instead. And thanks to the magic of video games, we can put the two side by side. That is, the new cars and the current cars, and see what is being done to help tone things down a bit. So on your screen is a current spec car and an artist's impression of what the new cars could look like. And already, things are looking promising. The new car is smaller, and noticeably so. It's not quite a return to something from the 90s, but with modern crash testing being what it is, then they are what they are. And I have put a car from the 90s on your screen as well, so you can use that as a reference point. The new cars will be slimmed down by around 100mm in width and approximately 200mm in length. So that's 10cm narrower and 20cm shorter. That already brings the weight down slightly, and the hope is that making them smaller and narrower will make them more nimble and responsive. Now I don't know about you, but driving a 2025 car in a racing game feels sluggish, even though they're rapid in terms of lap times. A 2005 car which has less downforce is a bit more intuitive to drive. It turns when you turn. Smaller cars means smaller wings. Smaller wings means less drag. Less drag means less downforce, and less downforce means less dirty air. But the FIA has done other things to help mitigate all of this as well. Here's the back of a 2025 car and a 2026 car. The diffusers are much smaller on the new cars and should be less efficient, which in turn means less grubby air shot out the back. On the underside of the car, the Venturi tunnels will also be smaller, which will reduce the downforce produced under the car at the same time. The FIA reckons this will mean a reduction in downforce by 30%, although by the time the designers have got their paws on things, that cut will actually be 20%. Still, it's a reduction, and that's a good thing. Because the more downforce you can produce, the more dirty air you get. The more dirty air you get, the harder it is to follow, and the harder it is to follow, the more of a performance advantage you need to be able to get past somebody using DRS or battery deployment, or both, if need be. It seems that in the last couple of regulation cycles, the ones since 2017 when the wide buoy regulations came in, the obsession has been lap times. Because when the 2014 regulations came in, the cuts to downforce meant that the cars were slower, and the fans didn't like that. But that's the problem. As the cars have got faster and heavier, the ability to follow has got worse. In addition, the fact that most tracks now only have one line, with Silverstone being the main exception, actual racing has got harder over the last 8 years or so. Which means that Formula 1 has been more reliant on gimmicks like the drag reduction system to help facilitate overtaking. By cutting the available downforce, the cars will now, in theory, be harder to drive, and can also drive closer. And the FIA has done this twice before. They did it in 2009 when they simplified the car's designs, and in a way, that gave birth to the reliance on very powerful diffusers at the rear. Now I've explained this before, but I'll explain it again. Basically, the FIA made the front wings wider and the rear wings narrower, so the cars produced way more front-end downforce compared to the rear. So in 2009, the cars were incredibly pointy because the aero load was uneven by design, so they were very responsive on turning. If the teams wanted to balance things out, they could take off some front wing, which meant less cornering grip, but it was better balanced, or they could add onto the rear wing, which meant they could offset the instability at the expense of lower straight line speed. With Braun, Williams and Toyota exploiting the double diffuser loophole that the FIA had been warned about, Braun in particular clawed back the lost rear end downforce and could run less rear wing if they wanted to. Red Bull took that a stage further with the blown diffusers in 2011, and then the diffusers became more of a rear end grip generator than the rear wings ever did. So the FIA banned the double diffusers and the blown diffusers to help try and bring it back down again. When the hybrid era started in 2014, they made changes again to reduce downforce, and people didn't like that the cars were now, on average, 3 seconds a lap slower than they had been in 2013. But even if a Formula 1 car is 3 seconds a lap slower than it had been the previous year, it will still cream any other single-seater around a circuit that's not an oval. And that would be an interesting thing to find out. How far back in the F1 regulations would you have to go before a current Dallara IR18 Indy car is faster than an F1 car? So there's always going to be the balancing act of trying to push engineering excellence and how fit the drivers are, because that's what F1 is about, engineering excellence. But you've got to make it so they can actually get within half a second of each other before the chasing driver has to back out because his tyres have been shredded. We've seen at 2 races this year where the guy who has led into turn 1 has been able to manage things out front, while everybody else has been shredding tyres trying to keep up, and then can't overtake because the overlaps required are simply too big. those two races being at Suzuka and Imola, both won by Max Verstappen. And I think Max knew all of this, hence the reason he managed to dive into the lead, particularly at Imola. Such a good overtake that was. But the difference in lap times this time round shouldn't be too bad, according to the FIA. The increase in electrical energy plus the reduced drag and the X and Y wings that they're going to have should offset some of it. So we could see maybe, 1 second changes in lap times instead of the 6 that we saw at Jerez in pre-season testing in 2014. Pirelli will be making changes to the tyres in a bid to help balance things as well. The front tyre will now be 25mm narrower while the rear will be 30mm narrower, which should help reduce spray when it gets wet, as the smaller a tyre is, the less water it's going to shoot up into the air. The diameter of these tyres will be shrunk from 720mm to around 705mm. But crucially, the tyre grip and durability is going to remain the same, and that should in turn help the cars race a bit better, and it will also be interesting to see how all of that is going to add up over time. We've seen at races this year Pirelli trying to go for two-stop strategies by bringing softer tyres. Those tyres with less downforce should allow the drivers to push a little bit harder and there will be less tyre saving involved. At least that's how I understand it, but like I said, wait and see on all of that. If a driver had to back off for 2 laps to have 2 laps of push now, that could in theory be 1 lap of save for 3 laps of push next year. I'll take that. Don't know about you, but I'd certainly take that. And the reason I wanted to bring all this up today is because, number one, we're just before the summer break, so the teams are going to be likely head deep in trying to crack these regulations for next season, particularly Red Bull and Ferrari. But just before the Belgian Grand Prix this year, several drivers expressed concerns after their simulator runs were, well, less than fun. Oh, and the fact that aside from doom and gloom for these regulations, we've only ever seen headline changes. But the doom and gloom has proved interesting, beyond the already documented worries about the engines. The FIA has actually changed the regulations to bring in ramp rates that will taper the delivery before the charge runs out. But it seems the only driver who is looking forward to having less downforce on tap next year is Lewis Hamilton. And for next year, DRS will be abandoned, replaced with the active aero that they can turn down on the straights and turn up for the corners. Alonso, Hülkenberg and Hamilton are the only drivers on the grid who have raced pre-DRS. Let that sink in for a second. But Leclerc, who had described a simulator run as not enjoyable, put it down to it being something he's not used to, but also said that things are going in the right direction despite that. He noted that there's going to be a lot that the drivers are going to have to forget, and some are going to have to get out of some of the habits and tricks that they've picked up to get the most out of the current generation cars and the cars before that. With less downforce on tap, some drivers might have trouble adapting, and those who have recently come out of junior formula might end up having an edge. Lance Stroll, meanwhile, called the 2026 regulations a glorified science project. Nicolas Tombazis, who is the guy at the FIA who handles all the regulations for single-seat racing, said basically the same thing that Leclerc said. The drivers are going to say that it's not very good because they've been driving in a simulator which isn't the same as driving the real car, and it's different to what they're used to. So naturally, they're going to say that it's bad. In 2024, when the first bits and pieces surrounding the new regulations came out, Hamilton questioned whether it was the right direction, calling it a bold step. The cars are looking to be 30 kilos lighter, 10 centimeters narrower and 20 centimeters shorter, with Hamilton saying that 30 kilos isn't really enough, but at least it's a start. Although this was back in 2024, so there was still that whole jumping into the unknown thing about it. The other drivers who had driven the first concepts on the simulators were thinking, what the hell is this? With the reports coming out that drivers were crashing the cars because the regulations were apparently all over the place. But really, all Hamilton wanted from the regulations were cars that were efficient, fast and a step forward in terms of how you can actually race them. It should also be mentioned at this point that the tunnels under the car being smaller and less downforcey means that the cars won't have to be as stiffly sprung as they are now. Now though, Hamilton has had some time to bed in with the concepts, and as things are evolving along, he's seeing that things might not actually be as bad as he or others might have thought. Ferrari has basically committed to 2026 with how bad things are for them this year, and some other teams might have also abandoned this year to get a head start, like Williams, Haas or even maybe Red Bull with how mental their car is to drive, and their desires to keep Verstappen. Hamilton said to Autosport that he has since been more open to the concepts and doesn't want to necessarily dismiss them as being crap because of what's going on in the simulators, but he is still being a little cautious of where things are going. The regulations might turn out alright, but they might still be rubbish. Carlos Sainz meanwhile has said that they'll just have to adapt to whatever they give them, and Formula 1 will come good, because it always does, with the way that the engineers work. And at the same time, Autosport has reported that the FIA is acting incredibly cautiously with this, because the first test at Barcelona next year will be behind closed doors, with no TV broadcast whatsoever. The FIA looking to avoid a repeat of the porpoising fiasco that plagued early testing in 2022, as some teams didn't get the regulations right immediately. Or like what happened in 2014 when the Renault-powered teams in Red Bull, Lotus, Toro Rosso and Caterham couldn't go more than half a lap before the engine blew up. But the thing is, we're only seeing this on paper. On paper, it all looks pretty good. Less downforce, less dirty air, slightly smaller cars that will be lighter, and the lap time difference shouldn't be too far away from what they're doing now. We can all agree that that's a good thing. But at the same time, with the cars not being on rails, it puts more in the hands of the driver, who will have to try and maximise lap time without shredding the tyres, through not overdriving the car. But with the modifications that Pirelli have made, there should be less tyre saving, so there could be more pushing done or more holding back, which opens up more on-track strategies. And at tracks where it's more difficult to overtake, you can have instances where drivers can be closer for longer and attack for longer before the tyres give up. And this is what the 2009 regulations were designed to do: make the cars harder to drive and put things more in the hands of the drivers. And in the 2009 to 2013 regulations, we saw some of the best on-track action that we've had in the last 25 years. But there are going to be concerns, most notably around what's going to happen with the batteries. Are they going to run out of power before the end of the lap, and so on and so forth, or could we have another porpoising fiasco? But at the same time, the way things are going, this is looking more like an engine formula than an engine plus aero formula, which is what Formula 1 usually is. Which also leads into the questions and rumours of who is going to come out the other side best off. Mercedes is rumoured to have nailed the engine side of things, which is why there's all the talk of Verstappen potentially going there next year, but it's still no guarantee of having the best car. Because over at Aston Martin, they've got Adrian Newey, who has probably been working on the 2026 car at the expense of this year's car, as Aston looks to start its relationship with Honda on a high note and get to the front of the grid, which is where Lawrence Stroll wants the team to be. But you'd think more of a big deal of the regulations would have been made. Like I said, there's only been headlines. No, this is how we want to shake things up, and this is how it should be better next year. From Formula 1, that is. It's been places like Autosport, The Race, and YouTubers doing it all instead, with Kyle Engineers doing a great video on drawing the Aero rules so we don't have to. But even then, it seems to be more doom and gloom than it does actual plus points for these new regulations. The engines are probably a bigger concern than the whole aero stuff, because the aero stuff does look genuinely interesting, and if they get it right, we should have better racing. But if it all falls apart, then, well, what then? If it doesn't work, how much trouble is Formula 1 going to be in? So then, a look at how different the aero side of the 2026 regulations will be, and if the on-paper gains and pros outweigh the cons, as well as whether or not it will be as bad as people think or want it to be because of the existing concerns with the engines. If this has been interesting for you, then do give the video a like so I know I've done a good job, and for more stuff from the channel, get subscribed and also get the bell on so you never miss out on anything else that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the rad lads over at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help keep the lights on or help with the picture purchasing piggy bank, there's a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. Well, there's super thanks for one and done donations and memberships for Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Maud, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.